Good morning. Morning. How's it been so far? Caroline, thank you. And food, everything, all the arrangements. Most importantly, I think we've had some great presenters. I was talking to some people, and the two purposes of being here are what? People getting to know each other a little bit better, the relationship, and maybe imparting a little bit of technical awareness and knowledge to each other. So hopefully those two goals, those two purposes represent, because it's fun to be together. It's fun. And I apologize that we don't have others that are here. But you're part of us as well. No matter if you're seeing this recorded or live or whatever, you are part of the weave. In fact, that's why I put that on there, is because I love the song. But we are dream weavers, right? We are the weavers that create the dreams come true.
Not the software, right? Not the Dreamweaver software, right?
You and I know that one too, but no, we're not going to even talk about that one. It's like Holt Fusion, we're not doing that one. But anyways, just wanted to thank you again for being here and for all that you're contributing to. I'm so glad to be able to introduce Matt Holt as our external keynote speaker. Matt has been a Go guru for a long time. He's amazing at Go. And one of the things that you can, who's heard of Caddy? Okay, that's Caddy right there. He is Mr. Caddy. He created Caddy. He's the man that put that forward. He's also Papa Parse. I use actually JSON to Go. You know that site for the JSON to Go structs? Acme Z, Cert Magic, many other things. He's been involved a lot in the Acme protocol, that whole drive, the lesson crypt. That's Matt. And so it's really exciting to have him here. He has a bachelor's, master's in CS from BYU, been all over the world presenting. He's also a great photographer. He hasn't done a lot for recently, but he has an incredible eye. Anyways, Matt, just want to thank you for coming and being at Weave, and leave it up to you. Welcome.
Man, I feel right at home with a bunch of gophers. You guys are Go Shop, right? Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm excited and glad to be here. I appreciate your company and your values. I'm here for the Go meetups every month. Well, not every month, but most months. And I really like your company's values. I can tell you are a good family here. I feel right at home, and I just appreciate your values on people, caring about people. And so I think that actually will tie in pretty good to what I am going to talk about today. And this talk is a little less technical. Maybe it's not about the Go language. It's even not so much about the Caddy web server. But hopefully you can maybe relate to it and take something useful and valuable out of this, because I spent years trying to figure some of this stuff out. And I'm not saying that it's a panacea, or like I haven't. This is not like a completely solved problem, but I hope that you'll get some ideas, and maybe it'll spark your imagination a little bit, and get you thinking. And so my topic though is about, so it's not so much about writing programs, it's about culture, it's about people, and honestly like health and happiness as a developer. And also building sustainable communities with projects. So how many of you work on projects outside of work, like code projects? It's about half, maybe a little more. I think that's probably pretty common. And that we do that because we love it. And we think it's interesting, we think it's useful. So yeah, I'm Matt Holt. I've been writing open source software for close to 15 years and writing Go for about 11 years now. It was brand new little baby gopher. Um, and so I'm going to tell you a little story here. When I was, should I turn this on? Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, someone sat down and next to me and asked me what I do for a living, and I told them that I sell free software. And they gave me a look, and I realized I had some explaining to do. So this is kind of how this works, I think. This is my attempt at explaining this. About 8 or 9 years ago, when I was an undergraduate, I started to write a little web server in Go because I wanted to. I needed to. I was taking a lot of CS classes, and I needed a web server that worked a particular way. And so I made a little web server, called it Caddy. I put it on GitHub, and I thought it was pretty cool, pretty fun little project. And so I, as one does, I put it on Hacker News, and for better or for worse, it was #1 on Hacker News for a little bit, and it was actually pretty positively received. People were excited. I think developers were excited to have a refresh in the web server space. It was kind of archaic, or it was getting, I don't know, it started to smell. And so we kind of needed to refresh the web server markets. And by the way, this picture in the background is not me, but I'll explain this in a minute. So I put this on Hacker News, and the project started to get some users, a bunch of contributors. It was awesome. We were having a lot of fun with it. And so I continued to build it up, and a couple months later, I released Caddy's flagship feature, which was automatic HTTPS. So if you're unaware, Caddy is kind of the first and still only web server that will obtain certificates for all your sites automatically and serve your sites over HTTPS by default. So this kind of became our flagship feature. This was our homepage. It was all about putting sites on HTTPS, and this was possible because of a brand new organization called Let's Encrypt that lets you get TLS certificates for free and automatically just by code. And so Caddy was the first to really integrate this deeply, and this was a game changer, I think. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I went to Washington, D.C. to demo this at a developer meetup, kind of like this, it received a standing ovation because people had never seen something like this before, where you turn on your web server and you can serve every domain name on HTTPS without even thinking about it in just a matter of seconds. You don't have to configure it. It just works. And so Caddy's popularity grew and grew and grew, and we were kind of riding that wave, and it was awesome. I had so much fun working with people and interacting with them and collaborating with them. And then academia and industry started to pick up on this, and there's a ton of papers published that use Caddy or refer to Caddy, and Let's Encrypt themselves even refer to it kind of as the gold standard of web servers. And so all this attention was really good for the project. We built a community with hundreds of contributors, and we had helpers in our forums, and the web was becoming more secure and private, and this was awesome. And then I graduated. And it was time to figure out, am I going to keep working on this project and sustaining it, or am I going to get a job? I don't think Weave existed then, so that's unfortunate. But I decided to try and make it work if I could. And so I did what I thought was the obvious thing, and that is I started selling licenses to it. Now, Caddy was still open source. It was still Apache 2 licensed, but I needed to make money from it. Otherwise, I couldn't pay rent, etc. And so I sold commercial licenses to binaries for companies who wanted to use it. And I thought this was a great idea. It makes sense, right? If you're a company and you use the compiled binaries, you just pay for it. Otherwise, it's free. You can compile from source, whatever. But this did not sell well. And I don't know, I think it sold a few licenses. It was enough to buy a couple lunches. But more than that, it actually angered a huge part of the community, and it was really controversial. Maybe because we were trying something kind of new, although that's not really true. But people thought it was too radical. And so you started to get opinion pieces like this that called it slime sourcing. And you started to get people that called it as greedy, and the criticism continued to mount and mount and mount, and things ramped up. And this was a little discouraging. About this time, I decided to go back to grad school, realizing that full-time on open source was not going to work. And so in grad school, I decided to continue working on it, and we actually implemented some telemetry for internet research, surveying the scope, the internet scape, I suppose, from a server side, which is a bit unique. Very anonymous, very benign telemetry data. But then that's kind of where things peaked, I think. The criticism of the project really kind of got to a peak level here. And there was this hit piece that was written against me in the project because trying to make it out like such a bad thing, and even appealed to my religion to make their point. And I was just so fed up. I was so discouraged with the community. I was burned out. I sat down with my brother-in-law, my roommate, and I was like, I'm done. I'm going to pull the plug on this project, and not just stop maintaining it, call it a day. I'm going to like take it offline. I'm going to burn it to the ground. I'm going to show the world that I have nothing to lose. I'm glad I didn't, but I almost did. And I realized at this time that the reason for this is because there is an imbalance in the open source world, or maybe this asymmetry. And like this crab, there's something missing on one side of open source. And so if I were to explain or say what this asymmetry is, I would tell you that it's users need open source projects, but open source projects don't need users. And I know you hear that and you're like, wait, open source without users? Like how the whole point is a community and collaboration, and that's true and that's wonderful. But there's this really long tail of open source projects that has no users other than the author, and sometimes the author doesn't even use them. I probably have the vast majority of my own repos I just made for me and I don't even use them anymore. So there's 330 million repositories just on GitHub, and there's way less than that developers. And the vast majority of companies use open source software. I wouldn't be surprised if this is closer to 100%, by the way, and some are just in denial or unaware. So quick thought exercise here, and maybe we can make this interactive. Let's say that you write some code over the weekend, you think it's cool, you put it on GitHub, a little open source license, and you update it once in a while. Now there's two scenarios. One is Jane takes your code and uses it for a school project. And the second scenario is a hospital takes your code and deploys it to their emergency room. You don't know about either. And I say hospital here, but could be a government doing something with it. It could be a nonprofit organization doing humanitarian work in a third world country. It could be the Fortune 500. It could be a cruise ship. It could be the Panama Canal. But you get the point. So I want to ask you, you're not aware of these. What is the difference between these two? Are there any thoughts?
Risk.
Yes? There is a difference? What's the difference?
Risk.
Risk, sorry. And then what about you?
Yeah, just reliance. Like the one really needs your thing to work. The other one, it's all right if it doesn't work.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Maybe go a little bit more precise on it. Risk tolerance.
Risk tolerance. Okay, these are all great answers. There are no wrong answers here. So just picking your brain.
One of them makes money from it.
One of them makes money from it. Yeah, that's probably true.
Well, there's ethical implications, right? Because like one of them, you can actually cause damage to somebody, like somebody can get hurt or they depend on it, right?
Yes, exactly. So the implications, right? Someone's life is on the line, or some economy of scale is on the line, and versus the school project, right? Yeah. So there's actually a big difference here. Now, let's say that you know about both of these. This almost never happens, by the way. So this has happened to me without knowing about it. I only found out that a hospital uses Caddy not too long ago. But now let's say you do know about it. What changes?
Stress level.
Stress level. Okay, yeah.
Take care of that code and you want to make sure it works.
Yeah, I feel that. Definitely. Anything else?
Nothing.
Yeah, maybe. What was that?
Could be nothing.
Could be nothing. That's true, right? Like, why care at all? Well, maybe the impact that your code has changes, right? And maybe the way you approach writing your code changes. So, when we talk about project sustainability and we want to understand that, I think it helps to look at what makes a project unsustainable. Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. And most of these reasons actually happen because a project is used. And that's ultimately where unsustainability comes from. That can lead to burnout. I'm not saying users are the problem. I'm really not. But look at this correlation. A project that has no users, that's infinitely sustainable, right? And then, but a project with infinite users, that's possible, is absolutely not sustainable. And why is that true? You don't have to answer that, but think about it. You can answer it if you want. Why is that true? And then, so I want to examine why that is true, and then how do we turn users from a problem, which again, they're not. Users are wonderful, but how do we turn a growing user base, maybe that's the problem, into like a resource for us? How do we make it an asset to our project? How do we build a community? So I'm going to suggest that open source projects can be sustainable, but they require you and them to be leaders and to be responsible and to take some initiative here and to do things maybe a little different than what we're used to, because we're so used to just looking at licenses and what they require and what they allow. And we're talking about, we talk too much about rights and not enough about our own boundaries and our own requirements. So when we look at open source licenses and what they offer us, well, they cover the basics. Developers get legal protection. They can't be sued for your work. You're not responsible if someone takes your code and then has a problem in their infrastructure. That's all nice. There's no warranty. And they should be crediting you. Like, all the licenses require copyright attribution or something to that effect. So that's nice. But also, developers who want to make their projects better, they would like to know how their project is being used. But open source licenses don't require that. That's a really simple, easy, free thing. And open source licenses don't require it because freedom. And freedom is great, and I'm advocating for that. But that's just the reality, is that that's not a requirement. Well, there's some other things that developers like to eat, and a place to sleep, and to pay the bills. But big problem here, big gap in open source licensing is that it's all free of charge. And so open source licenses do not answer the question of how to make a living on open source, or how to make a project sustainable, how to grow a project. But we can still leverage open source licenses. So most open source licenses, I just talked about Apache and MIT, the two most common liberal licenses. They have these as-is clauses that say that there's no warranty. Now this should give companies pause. This should make them nervous. Can't see my laser pointer, but this should be scary to them because they need to devote their own resources. They need to devote their own expertise to fixing any problems, adding new features, being responsible with the code they use. There's no safety net in open source. So if we read, and also between the lines of the license, we often talk about what licenses do for users and let you use it for, like, oh, I can do this anything I want. I can build a competing SaaS and make millions, and you're out in the street, sucker. But do you ever realize that you are your own user too? Like, you can use your project commercially. And actually, as the owner who endowed it with a license in the first place, you're not subject to license restrictions. So you can redistribute it freely, and you can you don't have to, you have the copyright, you can use trademarks, you don't have to state changes, you don't have all the usual restrictions. So you have a lot of freedom. You can set the terms. And so one way of doing this, one way of thinking about this is, yeah, we can't really change the open source licenses. They are liberal, they are free, and that's good. But we can fill the gap by setting our own terms still about us. So licenses say what the other person can do. Boundaries say what we can do and what we do, right? So we can still fill this gap, but we do need to set boundaries. And that's true for both the maintainers and the users or companies or organizations or whoever's using open source. So here are some examples of some boundaries for companies that I think are healthy. And I've seen these in companies that take responsibility for their code and make open source sustainable. Leaders set boundaries like this. And this is really wordy, and you can skim over it, and I have them on my website. But if you'll notice, these assert that the company owns their own problems. The company is responsible for what happens in their company, even if they use external code. So, for example, they don't use projects that don't meet their requirements. If the code doesn't meet their requirements, they either choose something else or they invest in it to make it satisfactory to them. They own their dependencies. They do their own testing. They, or they invest in it. Like the point is, they don't let projects, the blights of volunteer third-party projects affect their company. That's a very good, healthy boundary. Maintainers, likewise, can set healthy boundaries. And these look a little different because maintainers are often a sole developer. But you'll notice that a lot of these, I mean, if you talk to any decent therapist, they will tell you that boundaries are important in relationships, and that's true for open source as well. So it's okay as a maintainer to say that I'm just doing this project for me. In other words, what other people use it for, the hospital that puts in their emergency room, I'm not doing it for them. Maybe it is stressful to learn if that's the case, but that's not your problem. And you can do an open source project just for you. You can reject people submitting patches. You don't have to accept their patches. That's okay if it's not a good fit. You don't have to hurry to answer people. You don't even have to accept donations. And if you do get donations, they're not contracts. You're not obligated. You didn't ask for it. These are healthy boundaries for maintainers. One that I found helpful is that I don't give help for free in private. So like I don't typically, occasionally I'll answer an email or something, but I don't like jump on a video call or do support for free unless it's in like a public forum so it can benefit the rest of the community. I just can't afford that and it takes too much energy. And so when you don't have boundaries, you'll notice a lot of these side effects. And maybe you've seen this in projects before where, or in companies that aren't maybe very well managed, where your technical stack will suffer. Why does it suffer? Well, because the open source projects you're using aren't giving what you need because you aren't giving them what they need. That makes sense? Costs will increase because now you have to deal with that mess. You're gonna frustrate your employees who don't really kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And the maintainers will burn out, and so they're gonna start dropping off. Like they're not gonna answer, issues and stuff. And the incentives are just all messed up because, like I said earlier, like what I realized with the Caddy project at one point was that maintainers have nothing to lose, but no one invests in the project. Like when it really comes down to it, there's no, they don't need users. That's the asymmetry, that's the imbalance. But boundaries can kind of fix this. If companies and any users, I use those interchangeably, when they set boundaries and when the maintainers set boundaries, then what you have is you have mutually clear expectations. And you can keep your project in line with its roadmap a little better. Companies won't have to deal with frustrated employees or the technical debt that comes. They can have competitive advantages when they work with communities. They can operate more efficiently and they'll have even more satisfied customers. This leads to higher quality software and the best part is maintainers, they can cover their living expenses, or at least they can, if they're not trying to live on their project, they can at least maintain it with, you know, a healthy state of mind. Now, the obvious question you might ask is, well, this is free software, Matt. Money just doesn't come out of thin air, and that's true. So where does it come from? This is a hard question to answer because the software is free. So when I tell someone I write free software and I sell that, I can see why they're confused. Well, here's a few things that I think will help. And I didn't come up with this on my own. I've taken counsel from many smart people, like Bill Kennedy, for example, if you know him in the Gopher community. But I think if you want to take your project and make it sustainable, like financially, the first thing that you should do, I think is helpful, is to examine who your market is. Who are you going to sell to? Who is using your software? And there's three main categories, I think. You'll have consumers, you'll have businesses, and you'll have investors. I'm not really going to talk about the investor case because I think that's pretty rare. I've been approached by investors and I've, you know, maybe had a couple conversations, but kind of turned it down, realizing that if you want to go the investor route, you have to either turn your open source project into a business and potentially not make it open source, or you have to make something completely new on the side, and which can also detract from your open source project. And so, because you got to pay, you got to be profitable, you know. So I'm not going to talk about the investor route, but you can do that if you want. Consumers, well, there are a lot of consumers. It's a great market to target, except I would have you consider a few things. Most consumers are not technical and they don't care about open source. They don't know what it is. They don't know why they should use open source. To them, maybe open source just means free. And so like they don't know how to git clone your repository and set up a build environment and run it on the command line and compile things. So because of that, you're going to have to like nicely package up and bundle your software, and you're going to have to distribute it and polish it, make it really nice for consumers. Don't expect to get paid for all that extra work because consumers are used to paying a few dollars a month for backup services and software subscriptions and streaming services. I mean, $5, $10 a month, right? And so it's just a lot of work. You will probably need tens of thousands of customers in order to be profitable and actually make a living, let alone to make enough to, for example, hire someone else to help you maintain your project if you want to do that. And because consumers are often have a less technical background, you'll be doing more support work, and it's usually like how to use your computer kind of stuff, which again is great if you have the means for that, but it can also just be very draining. So if you do choose the consumer route and you want to target them, I would recommend targeting enthusiasts who probably know something about their computer, something about what open source is. Maybe they've even compiled a program before. And set your pricing boldly and build up some hype. That's you want consumers to feel that excitement about your project and to know that it's not a game to you. And so it's okay to price boldly, I'd like to say. Now, businesses, though, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about them because I think this is a little more straightforward. They have money and they pay money. And that's the formula. So how do you go about selling free software to businesses, though? Well, one thing to consider is that businesses don't, what matters more is their size than how they're using your software. Even if they're only using your software for what makes like some little test dependency in a side project over there, they still need it. Like it doesn't change the fact they don't need it to accomplish their business purposes. And so when they do choose to buy, they're usually pretty committed. So they won't usually buy 1 month and cancel the next. It's usually more consistent, reliable business. It's more of an investment for them. Now, what you might encounter is that they will, and I've seen this too, where that there will be extra burden to establish a business relationship with them because they have like legal requirements and they have a purchasing process and they require insurance and all this stuff. This is expensive. And so any business costs that you incur, you should pass along to your customers in the sense that make sure they cover your costs. Am I holding this close enough? Anyways, okay. Make sure the businesses cover your costs. Do not out of pocket liability insurance and just cover it yourself. That's really expensive. I never sign an NDA for free unless it's like a really common sense basic one. But if it's an NDA that's at all invasive, I always charge extra for that, or really like any special legal agreements. There are firms that specialize in things like helping businesses do business with others, so B2B consulting firms. When you set your prices, I see this so often in open source. Don't lowball your prices. I like to say this is not a flea market. You are the world expert on your software and a business is using it. Even if a consumer is just using it, you're still the world expert and your software is fairly unique, I imagine. So don't charge pocket change for this. And so when you're negotiating, you don't need to discount your software lower than your baseline. You can if you want, if there's some strategy you've got, but don't lose money. That doesn't make any sense on the sale. And so ultimately, businesses will expect to cover the costs that they impose on you. So just make sure they're aware of that and you price accordingly. Well, price what accordingly, Matt? Well, here are some ideas. These are things that allow you to keep your open source license and with proper boundaries that you've established and hopefully that the users have established, these are things of value. So I've put in bold some of the things that have worked for me, but you can really do any of these. I'll talk about some of them here in detail, but yeah, this is kind of a new space too. Like, and the market is even different now than it was a few years ago when I started doing this in about 2020. And because businesses right now are growing a little more lean and with kind of, is it a bearish market? Is that the term? Yeah. So with the uncertainty in the market right now, but the thing is that businesses are still doing business, and then when they need software that they need, you can still sell them software. And so, yeah, it is a little bit of a bearish market, but that doesn't really change the fundamental principles. We've seen a lot of companies that have been providing open source projects and libraries and kind of actually retracting on the license a little bit. We've seen some license changes go from very liberal, like a standard Apache or MIT license, to these like fair source licenses or business source licenses, which I think are fine. They are, I'm not gonna get into the weeds as to whether they are open source, but they're doing that because that model, like the pure open source model, is asymmetric. And so as a sole maintainer or as a developer, here are some ideas that you can use to make your project sustainable without changing your license if you want to avoid that. And honestly, I recommend that because after this whole license fiasco with the Caddy stuff, you know, Bill Kennedy sat down with me and he's like, Matt, we just got to make Caddy open source. Like, just make it open source. I was like, okay, Bill, how do we make money? And so he gave me some of these ideas. And they're honestly, they're good ideas and it works, and I'll explain why. So one is you can sell merchandise. I put this one in here because this one actually doesn't really work for me. I do have some Caddy merch, but I sold like 5 shirts. And so it takes a lot of time and you have to sign it all. And there's kind of this upfront investment in that, but it is fun and it kind of gets the word out there. You can go buy Caddy stuff at our little online store, but don't expect to make a huge profit on it or any at all. And frankly, businesses don't care about merch, although I do send merch to some of our higher sponsors as a thank you. And actually, Caddy shirt, and I love this. So, okay, so if you offer private support, companies really want support. They're all about like, we need support for the software. So even if they don't have to pay for it, they'll often, I get an email every week or so from a new company that is looking into support. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that I actually close all those sales. So, you know, it's still something I'm figuring out. But again, the number one thing for me is don't offer help for free, especially to companies. And you know, this can look like emails, calls, chats. You can even go on site, whatever is fitting. You want to answer a company's questions, be helpful so that they can have the information they need to commit, but then don't like go beyond that and troubleshoot their infrastructure for free, you know? I think that's counterproductive. You can give presentations like I'm doing now. It's kind of fun, kind of scary. But this can be a good way to build up your networking in the community. I don't actually do a ton of this, mostly because I get nervous. But you know, if you are invited, some of them I couldn't pass down or pass up. I couldn't pass up, for example, being invited to like Paris to speak at .go. They covered travel and lodging. So make sure that that's the case when you're invited to speak. Even if you're not paid for the actual presentation, it's still an awesome opportunity, and I have found those very helpful for the project to grow and gain credibility. Keynotes are typically paid, so just keep that in mind, but you can kind of do what you want there. And remember that you are the world expert on your subject. Only you wrote your software. I mean, probably you started it, that kind of thing. So you're the there's no one who can give better wisdom about your project than you. Okay. You can offer a hosted version. These are interesting. They can be a lot of work. This is actually the definition of a SaaS. So you can make a SaaS. And those typically have subscription models. They make a ton of money, and companies do really well with SaaS products, as you know, here at Weave. You can charge a premium for this. So like GitHub is a SaaS, but they also offer on self-hosted enterprise versions. So it's kind of the opposite, but same idea. And that's expensive. I don't know if you can GitHub enterprise pricing, but it's not cheap. It's kind of ridiculous. But companies buy it because they have to. And so you can offer a hosted version. It doesn't have to look like taking your app and putting it on your own server and running it. It could be an additional feature that needs like a central server. So maybe your open source project has like some sharing capabilities or some communication features. You can like host those and charge for those, but the app itself still works for free. So, I mean, there's options like that. So Discourse, for example, the forum software, they do this. You can run your own, or you can pay them to run it. You can do custom development work. And again, you're the world expert, so who better to have development for your project or done or related to your project than you? So this is very valuable to companies. You can charge a high premium for this. I always give a discount though if it ends up being open source. It's not my favorite to write proprietary code for another company that I'll never see again or have the rights to myself that's going to make them $1 million. I did that once actually by accident. I didn't know what I was doing, and I probably spent a weekend or two on some development work that a company needed me to do, and I charged them. At the time, I didn't know better, so I charged an hourly rate, and they ended up deploying this thing and making a whole new product line and had probably $100,000 of annual revenue from this one month's rent that they paid me. And so that was the worst. So I never charge hourly. And so what I'll do is I'll give project estimates, and if a company wants a time frame, I'll give them a pessimistic one on the order of weeks or months. And I don't go more specific than that because you never know. First of all, you might have setbacks. And so companies will be very pleased if you deliver 2 months early. And now you can get in the weeds in custom dev work. potentially it could detract from your open source contributions. And so you kind of have to balance how important to you is the open source side versus the doing contract work. But in my experience, contract work or like the custom dev work can be very beneficial to the project and actually really help enhance it. So I've never personally had a situation where companies asking me to do work for them has really derailed the project. I might have gone a little quiet for a month or so, but never like, it always ends up coming back full circle and giving back to the community. So that's good. But be on the lookout. These are kind of red flag, yellow flags. If you have to do these, just you can charge a premium for these. These are often non-standard, in my opinion. So NDAs, again, if it's anything out of the ordinary, if it's at all invasive, you can't even let people know you're doing work with us. Like, well, that's pretty invasive. That's a big opportunity cost. Like, to not be able to say that. So I charge for that. Charge for, if they want copyright assignment, if they want to own the rights to the code, that's very expensive. I even put tests on here because frankly, tests are not required, strictly speaking. They are a very good idea. I 100% support them. I would just charge extra for it. Okay. Don't get me wrong. Like, they're necessary for quality for code. It's because of that you should charge money, right? Because it takes a lot of time. Tests take a lot of time. Okay. Any of these though, you should charge money. On call, I mean, that's basically a second job. You can get woken up in the middle of the night and you have to go help a company across the country on the other side of the world. That sucks. So charge money for that like you have a second job. And yeah, I mean, I've actually had a lot of, some of this I don't want to deal with. And so I just set a high price tag and companies are like, okay, yeah, we don't need that. But I've never had a company say that about the tests. And then, okay, the last thing is sponsorships. So the last few minutes, I want to talk about this. And, sponsorships are, I think, actually probably the best way to go about this in terms of being able to grow and scale, because sponsorships, these are awesome. These are like actual tangible products that you can offer. This is like going to Staples back in the day and buying like Microsoft Office in a box. It's that tangible. Because companies, they need what you have to offer. They need your support. They probably want some publicity. They want to write it down as advertising maybe, or they want priority when they have an issue. Because they should realize that they are integrating with a community here, an open community. And so sponsorships are a great way to do that. It looks great for them. Imagine if a company that has a lot of developers as their customer sponsors a project that those developers use. Well, now those developers, their customers, are more loyal to the company because they're like, this is awesome. They're sponsoring this project I use. So it increases customer loyalty. So you want to make these very public as much as you can. I'm actually not great at that. I'm redoing the Caddy website to make that better, but it's an awesome opportunity. Make sure to tell companies how much you charge. Don't just ask like, yeah, how much do you want to sponsor for? Tell them. They don't want to figure that out. So set some tiers. Make sure to use, I like GitHub sponsors, but if you choose you want to choose a service that will manage the subscriptions for you. And by the way, well, donations are great. They're like one-time sponsorships. I think they're great, but for sustainability, you really want the subscription. That's kind of where it matters in my opinion. So choose a service that manages your subscriptions for you, like GitHub sponsors. They don't charge fees. And the nice thing is that GitHub is already on a lot of companies' accounts payable. So you don't have to go through a formal process to be added as a vendor. They just pay GitHub. It's a no-brainer. Whereas adding like an open collective, like that's a pain for a lot of companies' internal accounting processes. And so like companies don't pay companies on Patreon. Those are great services for some things, but not for this. So you want to kind of be flexible. And again, consider your market. What do they want? You can be flexible here. When you're setting tiers, don't price them at $5 a month. Unless you're targeting to get 10,000 sponsors. What I would do is segment your market into different groups. I've identified mine as kind of independent professionals, or like, indie devs. And then there's startup and business and enterprise. These are different tiers. They pay different prices. They have different budgets and they have different needs. And so I have like 1 to 2 tiers for these. And you can offer as a perk support. So when people ask for support, I come back and say, oh, I have this sponsorship plan that gives you support. And when you think of support as a perk here, consider the alternative, which is like consulting, right? That's like, what? That's expensive, 150 to 500 an hour. It's not a secure form of income. It can be slow and tedious, right? And it kind of gives smaller companies sticker shock. That's a really going rate. But sponsorships, we can leverage that because sponsorships are billed monthly, yearly, or quarterly. And so think about this though, in terms of time. If you have a $10 a month tier, I'm not saying you should. That's low. It's better than nothing maybe, but it's not sustainable. But this is probably 4 minutes of your time for that whole month. That's maybe time to respond to a quick email.
5 a month? Okay.
10 minutes. Maybe you can give a more detailed answer. But it's not a lot of money. Now, $1,000 a month. Okay. Well, now that's like a day or two of your time every month. That's forward to a company. And so I don't give time promises. And they're like, how many hours of support? I'm like, it's just whatever you need. Like, I don't give an hour estimate because, one, I've never had a company overwhelm me with support. And I just tell them, if it gets to that point, I'll let you know and we'll renegotiate. But I've never had that happen. And so keep in mind that even $1,000 a month is cheaper than paying their own developer, who they're probably paying like, I don't know, $180,000 a year to do it themselves, and they get the world expert on it. So that's a really good deal. Another way I like to think about this is that sponsorships are not insurance. And I have to say they're not insurance because I'm not legally allowed to say they're insurance, but they are assurance. And so you think of it similarly, like dental plans are what, like $40 a month? I don't know, I haven't checked lately, but you get what, 2 free cleanings a year? Which if you paid for those independently, it'd probably be like $500. So like total. So you're not actually saving money. You just get discounts if you need more work done. And so sponsorships can be kind of like that, where you pay a monthly fee or premium, but you get peace of mind because the company knows they can come to you right away and they don't have to go through all this onboarding and all this contract stuff. You get the help. You get to help them right away, and they don't have to worry about paying, being nickel and dime for just basic support issues. And they maybe get discounts when bigger things are required. So I like to think of it as kind of like software assurance and that peace of mind that comes with that. So when you are an open source project and you're pursuing to build a sustainable community, you want to actually, once you have the boundaries in place and you have these other tools in place, you actually want your project to grow. You want the free ability to do whatever you want with it to just spread like wildfire, but not on any hopes. You really want like a good standard license, not something kind of weird, because sure, that technically may like provide you some financial support. People are a little wary of unstandard licenses, and open source really thrives when there's that community. And so what I have found successful, and what you can do is again, let that project grow, let it thrive, let the open source and the freedom there really do its job. Get it everywhere. Get your project into every nook and cranny of the infrastructure world, of the internet, on everyone's computer, and sponsorships and development work and support. Those things will come naturally. Some sponsors might want you to be involved. Others might just want you to keep doing what you're doing. And I found that to be the case most of the time because that is the most valuable thing to them. So I guess my call to action for you would be to be leaders. I know you're already leaders in the space for caring about people and being really people focused. And so I would take that and run with that, and you can become a leader, whether as a company or just in your own like side projects in sustainable open source. Companies and organizations and governments, they should sponsor open source projects, and open source developers should set those boundaries and create these tools, use these tools to develop a healthy and sustainable community. And I think that's the path forward for open source, in my opinion, and for our own health, mental health, and well-being as developers. So thank you for listening, and I hope this was interesting. I have 1 minute and 9 seconds. If there are any questions, if anyone's still awake.
Question. How do you deal with someone using your software that you maybe have a strong disagreement about their values or the ethics of how they're using your project?
Okay, good question. It's Pete, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Great question. Thanks for asking that. That's a boundary you can set. I've decided that my technology is neutral. I know that encryption to protecting communications from a client to a server, that is something that could be used for good or bad. I know that there are people who use it to distribute pornography, which I am vehemently against. But I've also decided that, with the help of a therapist, that is a boundary that, honestly, so much of this is mental health. This is a boundary that I don't support that or endorse that, but I also can't do anything about it because I know that my project can also be used for good in helping vulnerable populations in regions where there's very active surveillance. So you don't have to be, you can be loud about it if you want, or you don't have to be. I choose not to be loud about my values in that sense. I just, if someone were to come on the forum and say, hey, we're using your project for this and this, laser guided missiles or something, like, I would probably just not answer. So that's how I approach it. But I think my time is up. But there was one more question though. Sorry. Is that okay?
I was just going to ask, can you call out like a favorite open source project of yours other than your own?
How can you do
What
that,
your
Brandon?
favorite
Come on.
open source project?
One of those messages again on hacker rank?
The question though, in the sense of how they run it, like
Oh, yeah.
ones that you've really kind of really run that.
That's a great question. Yeah, mine is probably not actually a great model. Like I still have a lot of imperfections. So if I were to choose other projects that I think are run really well, I'm actually really impressed. And this maybe is a scapegoat. It's not a scapegoat or a cheap shot, but it's the Go project. They're huge, and I know they're sponsored by Google, and that definitely helps. But Go if you look at their issue tracker, their team is small. They have 10, 20,000 open issues. That's ridiculous. I try and keep Caddy below 100, but somehow they manage it and they crank through it like clockwork. And I think that the Go project is a pretty well-oiled machine. So it is a bit of a different situation where a company is sponsoring, in terms of they own the project. But gosh, the Go model, their project is just really, I know that I can post an issue and it's going to get looked at. And I know that there are really good engineers working on it. Yeah. Sorry, we can go, but
No.
Okay.
Curtis, we'll do it for free.
Have you put any thought into how the boundaries that you're discussing apply to more of the inner source model, where you have multiple teams that have, a shared piece of software that's kind of open source in the sense that nobody owns it particularly within an organization, but you put any thought into how those things get along?
So you're asking if inner source software, so software used internally between teams, no one has any particular ownership of it. You're asking how do the boundaries apply? Is that the question?
Just if you thought about that at all.
I haven't. and that's perhaps one of my career weaknesses. I haven't worked in like a larger company like Weave. I've worked in smaller ones, but yeah, I haven't thought about that. I suppose it would just kind of come down to, this is my guess. It would come down to you setting personal boundaries as an employee and as a person, and saying like, and when you start to feel overwhelmed or like maybe it's too much, you feel pressure, that's something where I would probably just talk to, if I trust any of my teammates, I would probably talk to them about it. Just say, man, I feel like this is a ton of work. Is this worth it? Like, I don't know. I would just have that open communication. Your inner team is a community itself. And again, honestly, I love having a therapist. So I'm not even kidding. Like, even for little, like things that seem little, they can be a big deal. I would honestly get some professional advice from people who understand the psychology of things and like the mental health aspect of it too. If that helps, then
Thanks.
yeah, thank you.